How do traditional wine families differentiate their brands and market their wines in a crowded marketplace? How has the Gaja family of Italy made significant contributions to winemaking and to the Piemonte community? And what is unique about Famille Perrin in France, especially their approach to running their family wine business? In today's episode, you'll hear the stories and tips that answer those questions in part 2 of our chat with Fiona Morrison. You don't need to have listened to part 1 from last week first, but if you missed that episode, go back and take a listen after you finish this one. By the end of our conversation, you'll also discover how the Frescobaldi family made a massive impact on the arts in their transition from banking to wine. The Frescobaldi family connections to famous figures like Dante Alighieri and Galileo. Why the Alighieri family's vineyard is often known as the greatest one in the world. How Alvaro Palacios of Spain has proven Garnacha's place as the climate change grape. Whether these families view their wines as luxury goods or not. Why it's important to explore the stories behind the wines you love. How Fiona would pair her favorite childhood seafood dishes with wine, and why Fiona would want to share a bottle of wine with Shakespeare. To drink or not to drink with him, that is the question. I'd say yes. Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my 3rd book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 327. As I promised last week, I'll share a fun segment we did recently on breakfast television, pairing wine with every stage of a relationship, from first date jitters to getting ghosted, to getting engaged, yay, to celebrating an anniversary. So, have you ever wondered which wines pair best with the roller coaster of romance? From first dates to final goodbyes, we're exploring the wines that match every stage of your love life. Joining us today is Natalie McLean, who offers Canada's most popular online wine classes and wine reviews at nataliemclean.com. Great to be back with you, Melanie. My motto for Valentine's Day is candy is dandy and liquor is quicker, but wine is divine. Let's start with first dates. Which wine would you recommend for those nerve-wracking initial encounters? Well, the dynamic duo of Romeo and Juliet Prosecco, yes, those are real wine names. They are the perfect icebreakers for those butterfly moments. The Romeo Prosecco dances on your tongue with green apple and white peach notes, while his partner, the Juliet Rosé, flirts with wild strawberry and rose petal aromas. I'd pair these sparkling wines with citrus-kissed, pan-seared scallops drizzled with champagne butter sauce, garnished with fresh microgreens and edible flowers that mirror the wine's delicate effervescence. And what if things don't go as planned? Oh no! I hear you have something in mind for those ghosting scenarios. Indeed I do. When you've been ghosted, swipe right on these terrific alcohol-free naughty wines, and that's spelled N-O-U-G-H-T-Y, that will let you keep your dignity and a clear head. They're crafted from organic grapes and offer all of the pleasure without any of the regret, unlike that idiot who never texted you back. I'd pair the sparkling wine with a healing bowl of lemon-brightened quinoa topped with honey-roasted butternut squash, pomegranate seeds, and toasted pumpkin seeds. Comfort food that's still kind to your waistline. And by the way, you can get the naughty wines shipped directly to your doorstep from the website softcrush.ca. Moving on to happier times, what should we pop open when we pop the question? Getting engaged calls for a joyous wine and rosé-colored glasses. I mean, how else would you get married these days, given the statistics? but not so glum chum when you taste the delightful Lola Rosé from Pelee Island, Ontario. It tastes like summer strawberries and the excitement of saying, yes, yes, yes. Okay, one yes is probably good enough for an engagement. It's proudly Canadian and available in the LCBO and other liquor stores across the country. I pair it with delicate smoked salmon canapés topped with dill-infused creme fraiche and pink peppercorns served on crisp cucumber rounds, light yet luxurious. And for anniversaries, which wine would you recommend? I have 2 spectacular Cabernet Sauvignons that are also both proudly Canadian. The first is the Trius Cabernet Sauvignon from Niagara, Ontario, which is like a perfect marriage, complex, well-structured, built to last. It unfolds with layers of black cherry, dark chocolate, and cedar. The Best in Show Cabernet Sauvignon from Pelee Island has garnered 95 points from top critics and is equally robust and long-lived on the palate and the senses. I'd pair them both with herb crust rack of lamb served with a mint-infused quinoa piaf and grilled asparagus tips, elegant yet satisfying. All right, and as I've said, here's my favorite toast. May your glass and your heart always be full. Oh. So next up, I will be doing segments about St. Patrick's Day wine, whiskey, and beer, as well as great wines and spirits for spring, Easter, Earth Day, Mother's Day, and Father's Day. So if you have wine, spirits, beer, cocktails, or mixed drinks that you'd like to suggest that I feature, whether they're alcoholic or not, please let me know. Meanwhile, I'm still reviewing my favorite wines on Instagram at Natalie McLean Wine. Connect with me there. So back to today's guest. 2 of you will win copies of Fiona's beautiful new book, 10 Great Wine Families, A Tour Through Europe. All you have to do is email me and let me know that you'd like to win. I also still have 2 copies of Rosemary George's book, The Wines of Languedoc. I'll choose 4 winners randomly from those who contact me at natalie@nataliemclean.com. In other bookworm news, if you're reading the paperback or ebook or listening to the audiobook of my memoir, Wine Witch on Fire, Rising from the Ashes of Divorce, Defamation, and Drinking Too Much, a national bestseller and one of Amazon's best books of the year, I'd like to hear from you at natalie@nataliemclean.com. I'd be happy to send you beautifully designed, personally signed book plates for the copies you buy or give as gifts. I'll put a link in the show notes to all retailers worldwide at nataliemclean.com/327. The paperback usually arrives within a day or 2 of ordering. The ebook and audiobook are instantly available. Okay, on with the show. So let's get back to Frescobaldi. This is a fascinating story. 30 generations, you spoke to Lamberto Frescobaldi, but let's go back in time. It was a banking family, if I understand correctly.
Absolutely. Wine only became their key source of income in the 20th century. They were bankers, really. Actually, the florin was made by them, was created by them.
Oh, the coin?
The florin coin. They were like the Medicis, who, of course, they fought tooth and nail with. They were hugely influential and they were great patrons of the arts. So they had a lot of money and beautiful estates, which made wine. But of course, in those very aristocratic days, the only trade that you could really do was something like banking. It was very not seen to be working on land. That was for peasants. But one of the key things for them, which was critical and caused them international approbation, but also quite a lot of admiration as well, was they lent a lot of money to Henry VIII, King of England, who most of you will know because he cut off the heads of at least 2 of his wives and divorced 2. But he broke with the Catholic Church after his marriage to his first Spanish wife.
This Catherine of Aragon?
Catherine of Aragon, when he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn. And so he was excommunicated from the church. And the Frescobaldis were almost excommunicated from the church because they lent Henry VIII the money to actually pay off Catherine of Aragon and actually extricate themselves from the Catholic Church, which was hugely important and created a huge schism and actually sort of created the whole history of Great Britain because Great Britain became Protestant after that. And one of the greatest things that happened was that I was led by the historian of a family, who was actually a family member, to a castle out in the countryside, up to this turret in the castle. I had to put on a mask and white gloves and went into this room, and she opened this sliding drawer and took out this parchment that had a seal the size of a dinner plate. And it was a great seal of Henry VIII, and it was the original agreement document. I must say, I love history. That was a pretty amazing moment.
Amazing. That's fantastic. Wow. They had connections. They also knew the famous poet Dante Alighieri.
As I said, they were patrons of the arts, so they actually gave quite a bit of money to Dante. Actually, also, Michelangelo did the dome of their local church, the Church of Santo Spirito. They also had a family musician called Frescobaldi, who was a very famous Renaissance composer, very well known. You have to read the book, but there's some really good stories about some of the people that they aided and helped. But Florence at that time was so important, and it was so much a capital of the Renaissance, and they were very much at the heart of that.
At the heart of it. They even knew Galileo.
Absolutely, but can you imagine sort of walking through the Santo Spirito and sort of seeing the Frescobaldi palaces? And they built the bridge across the Arno, first bridge across the Arno, so that you could get to the left bank of the city. They were incredible.
Fundamental. Wow. And then we'll stay in Italy with Gaja, Angelo Gaja, whom I've met, but describe him. He is a ball of energy. But how would you describe?
Yeah, he really is. I call him Maestro.
Okay.
And we're both part of an organization of winemakers together. So I see him once or twice a year, and I absolutely adore him. He's strict. He's quite frightening. He's very, very intense in his ideas. And he came from very peasant stock. I mean, Piemonte, during the battles of independence of Italy, Piemonte was very, very poor. And it was his grandfather who really got the ball rolling and started bottling his own wines. And the search for excellence and for quality, Angelo was very much the pioneer. His mother was a great character as well and really took over a lot of the estate before Angelo came into the business. But they are uncompromising. He is uncompromising as a person, full of warmth, a bear of a man. These days he wears his bright red glasses, but he's got a huge smile and a huge hug, and he's wonderful. And I adore Gaia, who I've spent a lot of time in the vineyards, and Rosanna and Giovanni. I'm very close to the family. Rosa, his wife, and he still run the business, although the children have more or less taken over. He says he's stepping back, but I see him there every day when I'm there. He's a big man in many, many ways, but he's very courageous. They started with nothing. If you like, sorry, San Lorenzo is like Le Pin is for us. It's the birthplace of their style of Barbaresco, which also rather like Le Pin. People think that Barbarescos are very rich and quite tannic, and in fact they are most beautiful, elegant, violet-tinted wines, which drink so well, especially after about 20, 30 years of age. And I think actually, if I was trying to put a thread through the book, the wines that I love and which reverberate with me are those sort of wines. So maybe I chose people also because I had to really want to go and taste their wines. In the book, it's probably subjective because it is my style of wines that I like.
And why did he call his daughter Gaja? First name and last name.
Because he had two daughters to begin with. And his family, there's not a woman in his family. He said, what if I only have daughters? What's going to happen to the Gaia name? And so that's why he called Gaia. But I love the name Gaia because, of course, it's got so much resonance with the earth.
It means earth goddess?
It's earth goddess. And it's also, there are a lot of organizations now, organic organizations, and others which are called Gaia and bring this idea. And Gaia herself is really so knitted to the soil. And discussions that I have with her are very earth-based. We discuss ideas, we exchange research ideas, and she's just brilliant. She's great, yeah.
And is it true he charges £300, $400 for a tasting at the winery?
Yes, but very important. They don't make much wine. They don't have huge cellar door. They don't have hostesses, like most of these places, that show people around and then give you a tasting and a judge. If you want to go and taste at Gaia, you need to make a contribution, a charity contribution of €300 to their various charities that they support. Piemonte is still quite a poor region, and so they want to give back to the community and to the area what they can. And of course, people who drink Gaia wines, they're expensive as well, can afford a charity donation. It may seem a little harsh if you're a student and you want to go and taste the wines, but they are so rare, and it's a way of getting people to think about going on a visit there and giving something back to the community. It's quite unusual, but I think it's a good solution for them.
Absolutely. Certainly would winnow out all the bachelorette parties. So
Exactly.
Then again, they might all contribute. But anyway, Leger-Belair, Burgundy's renowned winery family. Why is theirs often known as the greatest vineyard in the world? What is it, and why is it so great?
I mean, it's such an interesting story, the Leger-Belairs. They live in the Chateau de Vosne-Romanée. So Vosne-Romanée, as most of you probably know, is the most famous village of the Côte d'Or.
That's where Domaine Romanée-Conti is, right?
And it's where Domaine Romanée-Conti is. But of course, there are other vineyards, including a very special vineyard called La Romanée. And it belonged to the family. The family were ennobled, like a lot of other people, by Napoleon. They were a military family. But they had roots in Burgundy. And they had this vineyard, which passed, unfortunately, out of the family until many years. And Louis Michel Leger-Belair, they still had the castle, the wonderful home that they have, the chateau they have. But he really single-handedly has managed to reunite the estate again. He's quite controversial because he's bigger than life. He's got very strong ideas of things. People think he's quite sort of pompous and snobby and things like that, but I think it's shyness because there's a side that I know of him which is unbelievably thoughtful and kind and questioning, but a lot of people don't see that side. He's really worked hard. The wines are absolutely breathtaking. I'll let you into a little secret. I think actually he makes La Romanée is probably the best wine in Burgundy.
Even better than DRC.
Aubert, forgive me. But
he's not listening.
I love DRC. But I just love the purity of this wine and the way he makes it, and his absolute individualism as a person, and the way he makes wines and the way he sells wines. He's very controversial.
What's the most controversial thing he said, or an example?
Well, it's just his attitude, because he can be quite dismissive of people. He doesn't take any prisoners. And he is so unerringly honest. And so sometimes that comes across with himself, but with us, I mean, sometimes if I ask a stupid question, I get my fingers wrapped. I know. Don't be so stupid. But I adore him and his wife, and I've had many evenings talking wine till late into the evening. And I love his family, and I think it's really somebody who came into the business having had come from a military family and really worked hard to reclaim their Burgundian heritage. It's a very unique story. It's great. The wines are very difficult to get hold of these days. They have a great little wine bar in the centre of Vosne-Romanée. If anyone is passing through, it's really worth going by. And I think he's just so individual and brave.
All right. We'll just hopscotch across the remaining ones. But was there something surprising about the Perrin family in the Rhone Valley of France?
Yeah, I mean, everyone knows Perrin because of Beaucastel. It's a really famous estate. And they're building a new winery now, which is so far ahead of its time. It's adobe style. So it's really using thermo-energy and a method called pisé with earth and straw to insulate. And it's very carbon neutral, and it's going to be a blueprint for wineries in the future. It's very important. But what I loved there is there are, I think, 7 or 8 children from the 2 brothers, Francois and Jean-Pierre. Every single one of them has a job in the winery. And it's rather like going into a Goldilocks house because they share an office, all of them. There are 7 desks all around. and one handles this, and one handles that, and one handles this market. And can you imagine the force of will, but also the way that the family sticks together? And I've been with them. I've been with them as a family. It's not just for show, because I've seen them with their masks off. And this solidarity between so many children working together, laughing together, tasting together. I just think that it's amazing. When I walked into that office and saw all their desks and everyone the same, no jealousy, I thought that was a blueprint of how to run a family business.
That's a lot of emotional discipline.
Of course, and actually Jean-Pierre and François are quite old-fashioned in their discipline for themselves as well as their children. And of course, there's quite a bit of bling bling because, of course, they run the vineyard for Angelo Gaja and Brad Pitt, which is coming apart.
The Miraval. Does it make just rosé, or did they?
They have a bit of white, but of course, it's known for the rosé. They've got into some really good opportunities. But what I love about the family is there are poor areas of the hillsides, because it's, again, Verona is quite a poor area, like Gigondas, like Vinsobre, that Carène, areas which were small villages, Rasto, that have come into their own because they've bought vineyards or estates and they're making wines there. And I think that's lovely because they've sprinkled a bit of stardust. If you go to Gigondas, there's a beautiful little hotel there, a good restaurant, but there's all been their initiative. They are very anchored in their own, but they have also found ways to make life better for others, for their growers as well. And at the same time, keeping this great family solidarity going through the next generation. It's great.
That's fantastic. Wow. I have to mention Alvaro Palacios in Spain. He's such a charming man. Everyone wants to be his girlfriend, I think, that I've heard talk about him.
Although, of course, what is lovely about Alvaro and Cristina is he married his school sweetheart.
High school. Oh, wow.
A high school sweetheart.
And they're still together.
And they are inseparable and they're wonderful. Cristina is just gorgeous. But what I love about Alvaro, I remember him sort of sitting down with his guitar and playing flamenco music and singing for me. You know, it's pretty intensive. It sort of gets you in the heart. But I've also been with him when he's been so serious and dedicated and tough with himself. And he's one of the most precise tasters I've ever met. What I like about him is the dichotomy of it, of his character. We can be having fun, we can be dancing, and I mean, he loves bullfights and dining on the table. And I've never laughed so much in my life as with him. But he's got this very serious, very tough side to his character. He's very tough with himself. And he's uncompromising on the quality of his wines. I think he's the best winemaker in Spain at the moment. And what I also love is that he works a lot with Grenache.
Right. He's a big advocate versus the flagship grape, Tempranillo, of the country. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I think he's proved that Grenache is really the climate change grape.
Wow. Okay, so it's heat resistant.
It's resisting well, and it's showing complexities. It used to be a bit veggie, a little bit herbaceous, and now it's showing signs of depth of fruit and tannins, which can be quite silky and soft in the right hands. I think he's pretty much been the savior for Grenache or Grenache. Incidentally, so is Perrin in Southern Rhone. It's
big advocate for Grenache.
Yeah.
Huh. Wow. Okay. Well, let's do some generalities here a little bit. When it comes to marketing and branding, how do you see these traditional families differentiating themselves in a world of celebrity winemakers and new labels and critter brands and all the rest of it? I mean, I know it's authenticity, story, roots, etc. But is there an example of one of these families that you've seen do something really interesting in the way they market their brands?
I think simplicity is really important. Being true to their roots. And the labels have got much cleaner and are much more sober these days than they were in the past. I would like to take a little story for Torres, who were known for Sangre de Toro, the little black bull on the, obviously, of course, Mas La Plana, the Cabernet. But one of the things that they did, which has completely changed their outlook, and they have done huge amounts on climate change and carbon neutrality and regeneration. In fact, they are, once again this year, the most admired wine brand. I think it's very important to show that you're paying your dues and you're doing research. But what I loved about Torres is they've gone into the mountains, into the villages, and resurrected old native grape varieties. But no one ever knew what they were. They were forgotten varieties. And they've created a group of wines called the ancestral wines, of which anyone comes across a wine called Forcada, a white wine. It's a name that they gave to a variety that they found. And it was painstaking. It took years to isolate these varieties, to make sure that they were virus-free, which is very difficult to do, and to be able to propagate these varieties so that you could replant them and give a heritage to grapes that have been forgotten. And I think that for a company that's sort of known for, in many ways, for supermarket wines, is a lovely twist to a brand that could be commercial, but shows how much they are rooted in their heritage and their history. All of the wines, actually, that I chose for the book were rooted in a history. And it comes back a bit, Natalie, to storytelling. It's really important as a brand to be honest, to tell your story, to not be tempted by trends, accept trends that will help us make healthier, not necessarily biodynamic or bio wines, but help wines that are sustainable, regenerative, and show the diversity of the land around them. Brands that do that, and I would have loved to have written about other brands around the world. I mean, I think what the Jackson family wines are doing around the world.
California,
but everywhere. They're everywhere. They're in
Yes.
Australia, they're in New Zealand, they're in Italy, they're in Spain.
True.
Bordeaux, I think, is extraordinary. So family brands that root themselves in a sense of place, to me, that is what the wine consumer today really responds to.
Right. Absolutely. We're all looking for the story behind the bottle. I mean, those of us who care about what we buy, just like fair trade and sustainability and ethical practices and everything else.
It's a rolling stone, and it's lovely to see how it's taking on and how you do not have to be a huge brand to be able to embrace that movement.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, the strongest brands often start off so small, but are so close-knit with their story that's what resonates and makes them into a global phenomenon.
Look at the success of Burgundy today. That's exactly what that's about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, all of these families produce luxury wines. How do they view the concept of luxury in wine? Do they see their wines as luxury goods or something else entirely?
I think we're all a little bashful at times because we're making the wines the best we can, and it's a market that has just taken those wines and run with them. Quite a difficult question because, of course, in that world, they'd be accessible to everybody. But luxury is usually something that is imposed on a product when it goes to market because of its rarity. And when you look at something like Dom Perignon, everyone thinks of that as a luxury brand. What the absolute genius of Moet Hennessy has been is that brand is actually several million bottles are made, and yet it still has that luxury image. So sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I think it comes down to being true to your origins and making the best wine you can. And whether it's an Hermes bag, which has been stitched by hand and takes 3 weeks to make, or a bottle of Domaine de Romanée-Conti, it's the handiwork, but to me is my idea of luxury. I don't think any of us wine people would like our idea of luxury to be bling bling.
Right, sure.
It's something more rooted into the soil, into the sense of play. And thank God, because that gives us our anchor.
Yes. In all your travels and visits, is there a particular tasting that stands out? Maybe it was an old bottle, rare bottle, or maybe it wasn't, but a particular tasting that you remember from all your research.
Funny enough, it might surprise you, like a lot of MWs, I absolutely adore Riesling as a grape. I adore Riesling. It's quite low alcohol, which is good in these times, but it's so beautifully reflected, like a crystal glass, the many facets of a great wine. And Egon Müller in Germany, in the Moselle, makes to me the absolute top Riesling in the world. It is like nothing else made. it's so balanced and so pure. And he and I were born in the same vintage, which is a very good vintage. And one day he came to visit me in Bordeaux with his friends at Trimbag, who are great friends of his and mine. And he bought me a bottle of TBA, Chocolate and Bernhaus Laser 59, which was such a mystical wine. I never thought I'd taste that wine in my life. And we'd had a very big day tasting, and we had dinner at our house, big fire burning and things like that. And at the end of the evening, he went to the car and he brought out this bottle. And we all burst into tears because it was just so perfect and so beautiful, and it was just the right occasion to have it. It was crystal clear and pure and had so much flavor to it. And a TBA, of course, is very sweet, but of course it didn't taste sweet because it had this lovely richness and dry extract to it. And it was youthful still and just gorgeous and nectar of the gods. It was, of course, I've been lucky to taste a lot of, the sort of wines that people talk about. But I think that was probably the most surprising and the most beautiful surprise I've ever had.
Wonderful. Moved you to tears. Holy smokes. This is marvelous. Well, time has flown, so let's just get to some of the wrap-up questions. Can you tell us about a favorite childhood food and what you'd pair today with it as an adult?
I grew up in Scotland, so smoked salmon was always something we had, and sea urchins from the walls of the cliffs, and a lot of seafood. And we used to drink that with really good Sancerre, and it wasn't the sense that it was great wine, but it was the first incredible food and wine matching. And I think we started drinking wine when we were about sort of 12, 14 years old. My father, I think when I turned 18, brought out a bottle of Chateau Lerve-Lescas, which is already one of my complete wines. Everyone knows about it, and especially for making wines on the right bank.
Beautiful Bordeaux, yeah.
So having very, very old Lescas, again from the 50s, and just being totally knocked out that a wine could have so much flavor and freshness still.
Yeah, wow, so lovely. And if you could share a bottle of wine with anyone outside of the wine world, living or dead, who would that be, and what bottle would you open?
I think what I would love to do, I think the person I admire most is Shakespeare. I was an English literature graduate. I did a degree in comparative literature at the Sorbonne. Shakespeare's been with me all my life, really, and I love his sonnets and I love his plays, and I'm a really avid theatre goer. And I think I would share a very, very old Madeira with him. Sort of sounds sort of Tudorish enough. By the fire, and probably want to recite poetry to him or with him or whatever. But I think how modern he was and how absolutely alive his plays are still and how much they do. And so, yeah, I mean, people talk about the Dalai Lama and people like that, but I would say the person who's really stuck with me most of my life is Shakespeare.
His literature lived just as some wines do, at least even in our memories. This is wonderful, Fiona. As we wrap up our conversation, is there anything you wanted to mention that we haven't touched on?
I think what I would really love to say is for everyone out there who loves wine, find out about the stories and tell the stories. They're so interesting. If you can go and see the producers, go and see them. As long as you write to them a long time ahead, a lot of people have opened their doors. The next generation is so important. We talk at the moment that young people are not so drinking so much wine, but read. I got into wine by reading and tasting. It's such a magic world. Don't be intimidated by it. Go and taste wines, and it will be a companion for great meals, but also great conversations and great travel for the rest of your life.
Wise words. Where can we find you and your books online? Académie
du Vin Library is the great source, and actually my book is available on that notorious
retailer
online
that begins
bookstore.
With A.
But you can find me in Piemonte. I'm on Instagram, Fiona Morrison, very Scottish name. You can also find me through VMWs and things like that, or through the domain Jacques Tiampon. I'm around. I travel quite a lot. I've got lots of friends in the wine business. I'm often in Bordeaux, so I'm on the right bank of Bordeaux.
Okay, well, we'll look for you there. I'm going to say goodbye for now, and I hope we can do this over a glass of wine. Maybe not yours, but somebody's we can afford.
Actually, I had a lovely visit to Canada last year
Great.
in the Okanagan Valley.
Oh, so, beautiful region, yes.
So thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation, Natalie.
Thanks, Fiona. Okay.
Bye.
Bye for now. Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed our chat with Fiona. Here are my takeaways. Number 1, how do traditional wine families differentiate their brands and market their wines in such a crowded marketplace? Simplicity and being true to their roots are 2 key factors, Fiona points out. Family labels have become much cleaner and much more sober these days than they were in the past. The Torres family of Spain has also done huge amounts on climate change and carbon neutrality and regeneration. In fact, they are once again this year the most admired wine brand in the world. I think it's very important to show that you're paying your dues and doing your research, she says. But what she loved about Torres is that they've gone into the mountains, into the villages, and resurrected old native grape varieties in Spain. No one knew what these were. They were forgotten. And they've created a group of wines called the ancestral wines. It took years to isolate these varieties and to make sure they were virus-free, which is very difficult to do. And to be able to propagate these varieties, you need to replant them and give a heritage to grapes that are being forgotten. It shows how much the winery is rooted in their heritage and history. Number 2, how has the Gaja family of Italy made significant contributions to winemaking and to the Piemonte community? As Fiona observes, they don't make much wine and they don't have a huge cellar. They also don't have hostesses like many other vineyards do that show people around and give you a tasting. If you want to go and taste a Gaja wine, you need to contribute €300, so about $450, to their various charities that they support. Piemonte is still quite a poor region, and so the winery wants to give back to the community and to the area where they can. Of course, people who drink Gaja wines, which are very expensive, can usually afford to give a charitable donation. It's quite unusual, but she thinks it's a good solution for them, and I have to agree. And number 3, what is unique about Famille Perrin in France, and especially their approach to running their family wine business? Fiona says that everyone knows Perrin because of Beaucastel in France. It's a famous estate, building a new winery now, which is so far ahead of its time, she says. It's an adobe style, so it's using thermal energy with earth and straw to insulate, so it's carbon neutral. She believes it's going to be a blueprint for winery buildings in the future. There are 7 or 8 children from 2 brothers, Francois and Jean-Pierre Perrin. Every single one of them has a job in the winery. She says it's rather like going into a Goldilocks house because they all share one office. There are 7 desks all around, with each person handling a different aspect of the business. Can you imagine the force of will to work together like this, she asks? But it's also the way the family sticks together. This solidarity between so many children working together, laughing together, tasting together. She thinks it's amazing, and it's also a blueprint for how to run a family business. In the show notes, you'll find the full transcript of my conversation with Fiona, links to her website and books, the video versions of these conversations on Facebook and YouTube Live, and where you can order my book online now, no matter where you live. If you missed episode 287, go back and take a listen. I chat about Italy in a glass, the story of Italy through its wines with Mark Millen. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite.
It's really interesting how Italy has more native grape varieties than any other country in the world for producing for wines.
How many does it have, approximately?
There are probably as many as 2,000 different grape varieties still grown here, but 600 certainly in production. But I think what's really interesting is the story of how some of these grape varieties were only saved by the efforts of really amazing wine producers who believed in the grapes and who worked hard to save them from literal extinction. An example would be the Fiano grape. Now, Fiano, we're seeing a lot more Fiano now. It's not just grown in its heartland of Irpinia, which is inland Campania, but it's grown in Sicily quite widely, little bit in Calabria, and I'm sure cultivated outside of the country as well.
You won't want to miss next week when we chat with Steve Hoffman, author of the best-selling new memoir, A Season for That, Lost and Found in the Other Southern France. He'll join us from his home on Turtle Lake, Minnesota, where he lives with his wife, their elderly and entitled pug, and roughly 80,000 honeybees. If you liked this episode or learned even one thing from it, please email or tell one friend about the podcast this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in learning more about the wines from the great families of Europe. It's easy to find my podcast. Just tell them to search for Natalie MacLean Wine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, their favorite podcast app, or they can listen to the show on my website at nataliemaclean.com/podcast. Email me if you have a sip tip question or if you'd like to win one of 4 copies of Fiona or Rosemary's books, or if you've read mine or are listening to it. I'd also love to hear your thoughts about this episode. Were you surprised about any of these families' histories? Have you tried any of the wines that these families make? Email me at natalie@nataliemaclean.com. In the show notes, you'll also find a link to take a free online food and wine pairing class with me called The 5 Wine and Food Pairing Mistakes That Can Ruin Your Dinner and How to Fix Them Forever, because I believe in happily ever after. You will find that at nataliemaclean.com/class. That is all in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/327. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week, perhaps a full-bodied Perrin family red. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So, subscribe for free now at nataliemaclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.